Hello, a very good morning. 4 minutes past 11 on a Sunday morning. Welcome to the show. I'm with Iain McCluskey for the next hour, General Secretary of Unite the Union. You can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, on the LBC YouTube channel, Facebook page, Twitter feed, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all. But most of all, we want your calls, because we're going to be taking calls to Len after 11:30. 0345 6060 973. Welcome.
Good morning, Iain.
We've been trying to get you in the studio for at least 3 years, so we finally achieved it. How do you think the campaign's going for Labour so far?
I think it's going well. I mean, it was always going to be difficult because obviously the Tories just want to talk about Brexit. It's Labour's challenge to try and break through that and talk about all of those other issues that affect people's everyday lives. And I think that's beginning to happen, especially with the publication of the manifesto. And so the next 3 weeks, or just under 3 weeks, it will be about pushing those issues and getting people to understand that it is only Labour that will make any real change to their lives.
When you look at the polls, that they are basically all telling the same story. Labour sort of 28 to 30%, Tories over 40%. Now, at this stage of the last election campaign, the polls were beginning to shift towards Labour. Now, some people say, well, lightning doesn't strike twice, but you're obviously hoping that it does.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is the challenge, in particular in our heartlands, in particular to those people who voted Leave, maybe traditional Labour supporters who are thinking about voting Conservative or Brexit Party. The reality is our message has got to be come home to Labour, because it is only Labour that will actually address the concerns that made them vote Leave in the first place. Two perhaps main reasons. One, forgotten towns and cities, in particular our towns, left behind by deindustrialisation. It's only Labour that has policies to address that. The Tories don't have any policies. And the second issue is probably concerns relating to migrant workers. And the reality is that although migrant workers are to blame for absolutely nothing in this nation, they're just decent men and women like the rest of us trying to improve their lives. The fact is that the Tories will do nothing to the greedy bosses and the unscrupulous companies who use migrant workers in many areas to undercut paying conditions. It's only Labour that will address that issue as well. And so that's the message. Come home to Labour.
But what do you make of the fact that in a recent poll, it showed that 47% of working class voters vote Conservative and only 38% vote Labour? That I found that astonishing.
I don't believe it. I mean, the polls are...
I mean, you can't just decry every poll. I mean, they're all showing similar things. They're showing the Conservatives are more trusted on the health service, for example.
Well, yes, and if you believe that, then you'll believe anything.
Well, the pollsters don't make things up, do they?
To be honest with you, Iain, 2 years ago, the polls were saying that Labour was going to be destroyed forever. And Jeremy Corbyn came within touching distance of power. Brexit has undoubtedly skewed people's views on a whole host of issues. And that's why I say it's the challenge for Labour to try and cut through Brexit, to say to people, look, there are other issues besides Brexit.
No, I get that. But it's very difficult when the leader of the Labour Party, the man who wants to be Prime Minister, won't actually provide a lead on Brexit.
Oh, that's
we know from the Question Time debate, from the ITV debate, he won't say how he as Prime Minister would vote in a referendum for a Labour deal or Remain.
And that is true leadership. What we have at the moment, I'm going to explain it to you. I'm going to explain it to you, Iain. The reality is that for 2.5, 3 years, we've had a polarised, toxic debate. You've got Boris
Johnson.
Extend
it by having another referendum.
No, you've got Boris Johnson, who's dismissed half of the nation. You've got Joe Swinson, who's dismissed the other half, as well as wanting to revoke democracy itself. We are a divided nation, and it's only Jeremy Corbyn who is attempting to bring people back together again. He's on the side of all the people. He's not a Leaver or a Remainer. What he will do in government, he will negotiate a credible Brexit deal. A credible Brexit deal that will protect jobs, protect investment, protect workers' rights, and protect the environment and deal with the concerns of people who voted leave, and then put it back to the people along with Remain in order for the people to decide.
So you've changed your mind on that, haven't you?
I think it's commendable that Corbyn is the only leader who won't play the game of division that Boris Johnson wants and that Joe Swinson, sorry, there's a Freudian slip and forgetting her name, should play. They're dividing our nation.
But you have always been against another referendum, haven't you? You've come round to it now?
Yes,
I
think
you said back in September 2018 we've had a people's vote. They voted to leave.
Yeah, let me just explain that. My union back in 2016 campaigned to remain and reform. We put more money and more resources into that game. But we lost, and therefore my union took a position. Having lost, we have to respect the 2016 referendum. Indeed, that's what Labour's policy was 2 years ago, and that's what Labour's policy is now. But the difference is this: we've had this toxic debate where everybody knows. You're talking about polls that you quite like. The reality is that polls continually tell us that our nation is split down the middle, and therefore in order to bring it back together again, it is pointless adopting one position or another. We will only now the other issue.
Just on that before you go into something else. Does that mean that the position of your union in those circumstances where Labour has negotiated a Labour Brexit deal, in a referendum then, you would surely be duty-bound to support that deal?
What we will do is what we do every week. We go in and we negotiate with the company. We bring that deal back in order to see whether it's worth recommending acceptance of, recommending rejection of, or adopting a neutral position. What I will do in Unite, and we're the biggest affiliate to the Labour Party, I will recall my Unite policy conference. And what will happen is 1,000 delegates from around the country will come and be able to look at the deal and have the option of Remain. And they will make a decision on which way we will campaign.
What do you feel in your gut? I mean, you're the leader. I think people will want to know what you think.
Oh, no, I think that is absolutely the correct thing to do. And I will, on a personal basis, although, of course, I am General Secretary of the largest union in Britain and Ireland, so I will look at the deal, as I do with everything. If I go into an employer and negotiate something, I have to look at the deal to determine whether it's any good.
Should that deal include single market membership?
The deal should include access to a tariff-free single market. It should include a customs arrangement. Without either of them, our manufacturing base in this country will be severely damaged, which will impact on everyone.
But you say a customs arrangement rather than the customs union.
Yes, correct. Yeah,
they said they wouldn't negotiate that.
Who won't negotiate?
The European Commission.
Of course they will. Of course they will.
No, they've said not.
No, Iain, of course they will negotiate something of that nature. Remember, the European Union, our partners in Europe, want an agreement with us. We're a valuable market to them. So, of course, they will negotiate. They will negotiate on the freedom of movement, because if we are out of the European Union, then freedom of movement stops, but it will be replaced by a mobility of labour agreement. But the big difference with Labour will have labour market regulations that stops these greedy bosses, these agency companies from abusing and undercutting rates of pay.
You can't be a member of the single market and not have full freedom of movement.
Of course you can.
Well, but that's been the problem all along, in that the Conservatives might have quite liked to negotiate something like that, but the European Commission wouldn't let them.
It's not often I agree with Tony Blair, but Tony Blair was telling us last year that, of course, you can reach different arrangements over the free movement of labour.
And you think all of this can be negotiated in 3 months?
Easily. The free movement of labour, Iain, the free movement of labour isn't an issue. The real issue is labour market regulations here in the UK. We need to stop the greedy bosses from abusing and using migrant workers. Labour is the only party that will do that. It's why I say to our people, working class people who voted Leave and are thinking about the Tories, if the Tories get in power, then they'll do nothing about that. They'll do absolutely nothing about that, because the Conservative Party historically have been a party that agrees with a cheap pool of labour so it can drive down the race to the bottom. That's what they believe in, and that's why Come Home to Labour is really the message strongly.
Shall I tell you something? When I was a Tory candidate back in 2005, that was exactly the slogan that I used, apart from it was come home to the Conservatives. Didn't work for me then.
It will work for us, Iain. It will work for us. We have a much stronger programme to put than you did in 2005.
To be fair, you're probably right. Now, Waspy Women, big announcement. Did you know that? Did you know that was coming?
No, it's a fantastic announcement.
I'd have thought they might have consulted you over that.
No, of course not. I mean, the idea that the media have that I get consulted on everything is, I wish it was true, but it isn't.
But doesn't it drive a cart and horses through Labour's fiscal rules on current spending?
No, it doesn't. It's a ring-fenced situation. This sometimes happens with government. For example, if a government lose a case in the courts, and this might happen with the Waspy Women, then there has to be a ring-fenced approach. We're talking about not the 58 billion, but whatever it is, 12 billion or so over 5 years. And therefore, it's ring-fenced. It's outside of the fiscal rules that Labour operate. That's normal.
It's current spending. So how can it be? How can you publish a grey book, which they trumpeted as saying, look, our manifesto is fully costed, here are all the figures, not a mention of this, and this is current spending. You can't deflect from that.
You can ring fence.
Well, you can try.
Well, you can ring fence something that as I thought Laura Pidcock answered you brilliantly before. This has been getting debated and discussed for a long, long time. John McDonnell, who completely confounded his critics 2 years ago because the Tory media are always ready to pounce on the cost of Labour's programme. He produced a grey book that costed everything. He's done
this doesn't.
He's done exactly the same again. But of course, he's been looking at ways and means to deal with what is historic redress.
Are you seriously telling me that they've suddenly found the answer to the Waspy problem in the last 3 days? Because otherwise it would have been in the manifesto, wouldn't it?
Yes, I'm telling you that.
In the last 3 days?
In the last 3 days, what has been... John's team worked 24 hours a day.
So they hadn't got it figured out by Thursday, but they've got it figured out by Saturday night.
That's correct.
That's nobody's going to believe that.
Well, I don't know what you mean by nobody's going to believe it. It's a reality. It's a statement. If people put Labour in power, they will see all of these issues actually put into practice.
But you just magic £58 billion worth of extra borrowing.
Well, it's not.
When the electorate, they look at Labour's offering and think, yes, there are quite a few policies there I rather like, but then they add them all up together and think, well, this is totally unaffordable. What Boris Johnson said about a magic money forest is absolutely right. We can't trust these people with
Boris
the economy.
Johnson, I remember Boris Johnson 2 years ago attacking and rubbishing Labour's programme then, saying that they'd found a magic money tree. He seems to have found two magic money trees now.
I agree
because
with you on
every
that,
Labour
It's
policy...
not quite as big a tree as John McDonnell's.
Be interested to see the Tory manifesto later and how many extra Labour policies they put in there.
But you must admit that it's a bit weird that it wasn't included in the manifesto.
No, I think, to be honest, and this is a fact of life, when government is moving so fast and we're dealing with such high finances, what has effectively happened is John McDonnell and his team have effectively decided that this is a historic redressing of a deep injustice. It can be ring-fenced and can be dealt with.
It's nothing to do with ring-fencing. It's £58 billion of extra borrowing at a time when surely we can't afford to borrow more than we are.
Well, let me put it back to you. Supposing the Waspy women win their court case, what does the government do then?
Well, they lost the court case recently,
and they're appealing.
Well, then you cross that bridge when you come to it, don't you?
Well, Labour are already...
can't anticipate winning a court case.
Well, you don't have to, but you're saying to me that how can you magic the money up? If the court case goes in the favour of the Waspy women, whoever's in government would have to respond to that.
Well, that may be so, but then they should have put that in the manifesto, shouldn't they?
In Labour's manifesto, it spells out that this is a concern and we're going to be working to see what we can do about it.
But there was no commitment. There was an aspiration.
You've just said in the last 3 days, the team have come up with a way to.
I don't think anyone listening to this, I don't think is going to buy that at all. Do you know that, or are you surmising that?
I'm surmising that that's what's happened.
That's not how these things work. They will have seen that waspy woman on the Question Time debate having a go at Boris Johnson. He rather floundered in his answer, and they thought, I know. Let's get him on that.
I think that's
pure politics, isn't it?
I think that's a bit cynical, to be honest. The reality
Perish the thought.
Well, the reality is that Labour are the only party that has been in constant debate and discussion about this grave injustice, and therefore. The idea of then saying, look, let's offer this 3.8 million women who have been badly let down by consecutive governments, Labour are going to do something about it. If that requires additional borrowing, 12 million a year, because, of course, the other thing, Iain, that your listeners should take hold of is, where is the money coming from? We are told by independent fiscal bodies that every year we lose £40 billion worth of tax through tax avoidance, about 120 billion as a result of tax evasion. We've got companies like Google and Amazon who pay no damn tax, and Labour are going to deal with that.
Just not very much.
Well, exactly.
No, I'm with you on that.
I know you are. And the reality is Labour is going to deal with the gross injustices where the super rich and the corporate elite do not pay any tax.
Let's talk about another injustice. We're told that only the top 5% of earners will pay more income tax under Labour's tax plans. It's not true, though, is it? Because they're abolishing the married tax allowance. So, and that affects everybody, whether you're on a low income or not. So everybody will lose £250. So it's not true to say that the lower paid aren't going to pay more tax.
Well, it is true in the sense that when the position of Labour is that income tax will not go up for 95% of the population. That's
but it will, because you're going to lose that tax allowance.
Well, because tax relief is different from income tax, and of course you're right.
Well, it's not. It's a tax relief from income tax, so therefore you're going to be paying more income tax.
No, when Labour has said income tax will only go up for the top 5%, that is the truth. Tax relief is being taken away from married couples. I mean, and therefore you're right in raising that point. But of course, that needs to be balanced against all of the other pluses that married couples and indeed couples who are not married will gain from the whole basket of issues that Labour are putting forward. Just look at the childcare. That will save huge amounts, thousands of pounds for many married couples and non-married couples with young children. There are a whole host of different issues that have to be balanced.
And also, and this is not on income tax, it's on council tax, if Labour really cared about the single pensioner who's fairly hard up, why would they be removing the single person's council tax
but
rebate?
Again, that has to be put in context. We have council rates at the moment that are exorbitantly high in many parts of our nation.
So for single people, you're going to raise them even more?
Because central government have slashed council spending. Labour is going to reinstitute the amount of spending that local councils have, which will reduce taxes.
Really? You're going to reduce council? Is that that's what you've heard? Labour want to reduce council tax.
I am convinced that when Labour is in government, central government will provide sufficient funds for local authorities to be able to reduce the amount of.
But that money still has to come from somewhere. I mean, I see the logic. If central government provides more money, then the local council tax can reduce, but that extra money still has to be raised either through taxation or through borrowing.
Or through what I've just said, corporation tax. The corporation tax.
But you've already spent all of the tax rises on business on other things.
No, Ian, that's unfair. John McDonnell's Grey Book spells out exactly what we would gain from revenue taxation and what we would spend, and also capital spent for all the infrastructure projects that we desperately need. So these are all properly costed.
And what about taxing dividend income? Because I think a lot of people seem to think that it's only rich people who get dividends. But of course, a lot of pensioners who are not rich at all rely on dividend income. And that's now going to be taxed in a different way than it is now.
We're talking about fair taxation here. You can't pluck out a single issue and not weigh it against all of the benefits. You're talking about pensioners. Look what's happening with social care within our nation. Labour is the only party historically wanting pensioners to have some dignity in their old age by dealing with social care. You had a particularly belligerent caller on earlier.
I did.
Talking about how important social care was. David, I think his name was.
I agree with him.
And he's 100% correct.
He is
It's
right.
only Labour that is dealing with dignity in old age. And so you can't pluck out one issue. The vast majority, the overwhelming majority of pensioners do not have dividend income. And what Labour are trying to do is introduce fairness in our tax system. We've got, not far from here, we're in London, not far from here, I organise contract cleaners who pay more tax cleaning buildings than the CEOs who operate in those buildings because of the tax scams, the loopholes. All Labour is saying is we want the super rich and the corporate elite to pay their fair share of tax. And if they do, we'll have huge amounts of money.
Right. I've only got 4 more minutes in this interview, and then we're going to take calls. And I'm sure some of the calls will take up some of the issues that I'm not going to be able to cover. But I want to talk a little bit about workers' rights, because a lot of people are saying, well, look, what Labour are promising is going back to the 70s, and you and I are old enough to remember the 70s. And I would hope that you would agree that a lot of the industrial relations in the 1970s weren't, shall we say, to the benefit of the economy. You had sort of all the mass meetings with hands up in the air, the closed shop and all of that, secondary picketing. You don't want to bring all that back, do you?
Well, in the 70s, and you're right, I remember them very well indeed, appalling management. Hopefully managements have improved in the last 30, 40 years, and certainly trade unions have. But let me make this point, Iain, about workers' rights. How is it right that this very nation of ours, that we love so much, that defeated fascism at the end of the Second World War and gave Europe all of the freedoms that they currently have, how is it possible that German workers have got better protection than British workers, French workers, Italian workers, Dutch workers? Every worker in Europe has better protections than British workers.
Well,
it's a scandal.
Depends which
bits
of workers' rights you're looking at.
All of them. All of them.
That's simply not true.
It is as simple as that.
You look at most of our workers' rights, and they certainly exceed the EU's bare minimum.
No, they don't. No, they don't. The reality is, all that trade unions have fought for many years now is not to be treated better than anybody else, but to have a level playing field with about how European workers get treated and British workers are badly behind.
Well, let's just tick these things off. Do you want to see the return of the closed shop?
No, the closed shop's not an issue anymore.
So you don't?
Well, I'm not particularly interested in closed shop. I'm only interested...
Secondary picketing.
Solidarity action is within the very veins of trade unionism. And that is something that, of course, is a legitimate right. And by the way, every country in Europe is allowed to do that.
But so you would like to bring back secondary picketing?
I would like to bring back solidarity action. I would like a level playing field with our sisters and brothers in Europe.
So basically, if workers at one factory decide that they want to support workers in an entirely different factory with an entirely different employer, you think they should be able to withdraw their labour for that?
No, it doesn't work that way, Iain.
It did in the 70s.
It didn't work that way even in the 70s.
Yes, because the docks went out on strike in support of the miners and vice versa.
That actually never happened. There was no dockers strike in favour of the miners in 72 and 74.
No, but there was in 1984, I think it was.
That was under Thatcher. No, there wasn't. No, there wasn't.
Well,
I wish there had been, but the reality is that's not true. You and I can talk about reflecting on the 70s outside of this programme. The fact is, I want what German workers can do, French workers, Italian, Spanish. I want that for British workers.
But you want to keep secret ballots. You wouldn't have mass meetings at factories where people put their hands up.
I'm happy with secret ballots.
Excellent, good. Right, very quickly, Nationalisation. I always think that this really is an ideological struggle here between those who think that privatisation is the be-all and end-all for every single sector and those who believe that the state should run every single sector and never the twain shall meet. In effect, though, there are some things that are better run by the private sector and some that are better run by the state, aren't there?
I think the issue on nationalisation or public ownership, which is a much better way of describing it, Labour's commitment to do that for rail and mail has huge support amongst the electorate. Our water, look at what's happened to our water. It's owned by foreign hedge funds who rip us off. The money goes out of our nation, and yet the job that they do, here we are in London, Thames Water, there's leaks everywhere. It's an appalling service.
They're compensating for the lack of investment over the previous 10 decades, aren't they?
No, they're not. They've been.
That's the reason it was privatised in the first place, because the state couldn't keep up with the investment requirements.
That isn't the case. The reality is that they're not investing. The hedge fund money floods out.
I've run out of my time, so I'm not going to go over time. I'm going to let my callers put any other questions to you. I do want to ask you just in 30 seconds, if Jeremy Corbyn loses this election, does he have to stand down? John McDonnell seems to think so. Do you?
Jeremy Corbyn's not going to lose this election.
Well, if he does,
he's not going to lose this election.
Look at the polls. I mean, you've got to entertain the possibility.
I believe in the next 3 weeks, people will come home to Labour.
And if they don't,
they will see that Labour is the only party that brings about real change.
And if they don't, John McDonnell has raised the possibility, not me, John McDonnell.
We will reflect on the outcome of the election.
Okay. Hello, a very good morning. It's 11:35. Len McCluskey is with me, General Secretary of Unite the Union, about to take your calls. Colin is in Bexhill-on-Sea. Hello, Colin.
Yeah, morning.
Morning. What would you like to ask?
I'm one of Len's members. I've been a member through various guises for 50 years. I do not understand why we have endorsed Corbyn when the union endorsed him. Wasn't put out to the members. If it had been, there's no way he would have got the vote. The man is toxic. I mean, Len keeps going on about like the polls and all that. He needs to get out and talk to people. He's just talking to his own circle. The man is toxic. You talk to people that canvass. I've got mates who canvass. It's always him. Can't vote for that bloke. Every time.
Doesn't that happen with all political leaders?
Long Bailey does a media interview, loses Labour thousands of votes. These people are serially incompetent. The credible, competent people are on the back benches. They were booted there because we had an influx of the SWP people, and it's now become a cult, like it did back with the Ben mob.
Let's put that to Len.
Well, Colin, I have to say that I completely disagree with you when you say that the Labour Party has now become a cult. The Labour Party is the largest political party in the whole of Europe. And the reason for that is because Corbyn and his new style of politics attracted literally hundreds of thousands, 480,000 new members, an awful lot of them young members. Now, you say, why does Unite support Labour? Well, it's because...
Well, no, you're saying why didn't Unite support Corbyn, not Labour?
Sorry, Corbyn. The reality is that's the decision taken by our policy conference. That's the decision taken by our executive. Len McCluskey doesn't wake up one morning and suddenly decide that we're going to do this on behalf of Unite. And let me just say this, Cole. 2 years ago, Jeremy Corbyn took us within touching distance of power. Commentators virtually unanimously believe that...
You were 60 seats away from it.
The commentators, virtually all of them, believe that had the election gone on another fortnight, then Corbyn would have been in power. So... I just disagree with you. It's wrong to say this is a decent, genuine man who will carry out the policies that will make your life and your Unite members' lives and working people's lives dramatically better.
He's got no chance, mate. Why do you keep on with this guff? He has got no chance. You know it. You're handing the next election to Johnson on a plate by leaving this man in place. It's too late now. All we can do afterwards is limit the damage.
Well, Colin, obviously I'm slightly more optimistic than you. I believe that we can win this election.
You need to look at reality, mate.
I believe that we can win this election. Well, the reality is that it's only Labour at the moment that's going to change your life and the life of ordinary working people.
They would do with a credible, competent leader, not with this bloke.
Who would you like to be leader of the Labour Party, Colin?
Me?
Yeah.
Starmer.
Keir Starmer. Okay. Do you like Keir Starmer, Len? Would you think he'd be a
Keir
good
Starmer
leader?
is a consummate politician, a very, very good politician. But Jeremy Corbyn is the leader, being elected democratically twice by a landslide vote.
Colin, strong views. Thank you. Let's go to Jason in Bromley. Jason, what would you like to ask Len?
Yes, hello, Len. So I'm a bus driver. I've been driving buses for 11 years, and in the last caller, you said only Labour will improve my life. Yeah.
Yep.
That's correct. So that's what you said. So I've been a bus driver for 11 years. I've been a part of the Unite Union for probably the best part of 8 years. And in that time, under Unite, I've seen my terms and conditions go downhill. And I watched you take out £400,000 to buy another property in London. So you've benefited from Unite. But I would suggest that every single bus driver listening quit their Unite membership, because we have been shafted.
Well, hang on. If you're a member of Unite, why would you ask everyone else to quit Unite, but you haven't done it yourself?
No, I'm not a member. I haven't been a member.
You just said you were.
Years. No. I've been
Unless
a part
I misunderstood
of
you.
Unite.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was a part of Unite. No longer a part of Unite.
All right.
Because my terms and conditions have gone down. What have you not seen how bus drivers are the most probably unhappiest workers out there right now?
Okay, Len.
Jason, we have nearly 100,000 bus drivers who are members of Unite. I'm doing this programme from London, and London bus workers, of which we have 28,000 members, have received tremendous breakthroughs. But you know, this isn't about Len McCluskey. This isn't about a general secretary. This is about a group of workers coming together in a union and being prepared to fight an employer who's being unfair. You've just said, Jason, you haven't been a member for 8 years. Well, how do you expect us to fight in Bromley for better paying conditions if you're not a member of that collective? I don't have a magic wand to make things better.
I joined RMT. And they've done a hell of a lot more. So I want to know, where is my £400,000? You've had 400,000. Where's mine?
Well, Jason, that's nonsense. You're reading the right-wing press far too much. I haven't had £400,000 from Unite at all. Quite the opposite. So, I mean, I would suggest that you don't read the Tory press so much. And if you're a member of a union, then fine. That is about collectively coming together and fighting. In Bromley at the moment, we've got workers fighting to keep your libraries open. Go and join them. Come together. That's the way collectively for people to advance their paying conditions.
Jason, thank you. Let's move on to Andrew in Lichfield. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, I've just got a quick question for Len. Why is Labour proposing to tax small and local customers at the same rate of corporation tax, 26%, as they are Google and Apple's of this world?
Well, that's actually not true, Andrew. They're not.
Corporation tax applies to small businesses as well as Google.
Except small businesses will be 21% if there's a particular profit threshold. Read the manifesto. So, Andrew, it isn't. It's a perfectly good question, by the way. The multinationals who are going to be asked to pay 26%, which incidentally is only the same level that these multinational companies are paying in France and Germany and elsewhere. But you're absolutely correct that small and medium businesses should not be hit in the same way. And Labour has said they won't be. It will be a lower corporation tax for small and medium businesses. On top of which, Andrew, small and medium businesses, and these are the lifeblood of our economy, have been desperate to be able to gain loans that have been stopped by bankers. What Labour is doing with its National Investment Bank and regional investment banks is to encourage our small and medium businesses to invest more. That's what brings sustainable growth in our economy. And if I was a small or medium business, I'd be delighted and can't wait for Labour to get into power. But it's a great question. And you are right for me to point out that small and medium businesses will not be subjected to the 26%.
Andrew, thank you. Let's go to Steve in Sutton. Steve, what's your question?
Hi, Iain. Good to talk to you again.
Hi. Go ahead.
Mr. McCluskey, can I ask if the December rail strike is politically motivated, please?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, quite the opposite. Obviously, a rail strike doesn't particularly assist in an election campaign, a Labour campaign. I mean, obviously, it's not my union, and the RMT are engaged in that, so you'd have to speak to them directly. But in the main, the RMT are fighting a tremendous battle for all of us in relation to safety on our rails, rather than the cut, and the race for the bottom. That is the culture in our nation. But no, it's not politically motivated.
Why do you think it's political, Steve?
Because there are two reasons. I think there's the timing of it. South Eastern have operated trains without guards quite safely for the past 20 years, but now that it's being turned on to South Western. It didn't work with Southern. Now it's being turned on to South Western. I just don't understand the logic of it.
Well, as I say, it's certainly not politically motivated for the reasons that I've indicated. And, you know, I would urge all rail companies to put safety as their number one issue. And I know that that's certainly what the RMT will be trying to negotiate. So let's hope they can reach agreements without any industrial action.
OK, Steve, thank you very much. Paul says, how many politicians does it take to change a light bulb? Who cares? Just keep an eye on the stepladder. Which is probably the best joke you're going to hear on the programme today. Right, we will take more calls with Len McCluskey in just a moment. Don't forget, you can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, YouTube, Facebook, and indeed LBC's Twitter feed. It's 11:45.
Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 11:48. Len McCluskey with me in the studio for another 12 minutes. So let's get as many calls in as possible. Jenny is in Harpenden. Hi, Jenny.
Hello. Yes, something that puzzles me a little. Labour's tax plans seem to be predicated on the status quo. What's to stop all these multinationals who are going to pay more money just going elsewhere, i.e. Ireland, where corporation tax is cheaper? Yes, they'll be able to collect money from people on PAYE, but people who have substantial money is very movable. They'll move it. So who's going to take up the shortfall?
Well, Jenny, good morning, by the way. The situation is that Labour's tax plan is far from the status quo. It's the most radical redistribution of wealth we've had for quite a while.
I love it how you and Jeremy use the word radical when what you mean is left wing.
No, radical is a particularly good way to describe it, because the truth of the matter is the corporation tax, and you're saying, Jenny, well, what's stopping companies from just moving? Well, they don't move from Germany or from France or from Italy, where all of these companies operate. And they operate at the same type of tax rates as Labour is suggesting. And remember, I'll point this out, Jenny, that back in the days of Margaret Thatcher, corporation tax was 36% at one particular level. This is about trying to make certain that the huge amounts of money and profits that are being made by corporate giants is properly distributed. Let me give you one startling fact. 35 years ago, 65% of our GDP, our gross domestic product, in other words, the wealth that is created each year, 65% of that used to go to workers in their salaries and in their wage packets. That is now down to 51%, and that 14% drop is devastating. The 14% hasn't disappeared. It's just gone to the super rich and the corporate elite. And so what Labour is saying, for the first time ever, they're going to challenge that inequality and make certain that this huge amount of wealth that is created is properly distributed and is invested in our country and in our communities and in our public services, and more importantly, from my point of view, invested in our manufacturing. We used to be a nation that built things, and now we have been reduced over the years, the last 30 or 40 years. Labour, for the first time, is going to change that and reverse that, and that will create greater tax revenues, which we'll be able to spend to improve everybody's life.
Jenny, thank you for your call. Sangeeth is in Canary Wharf. Hello, Sangeeth.
Hi. Good morning to Len, and thank you for taking my call. I'm a GP. I work for the NHS. I've worked for the NHS for Yes. A lot of my question is pretty simple. A lot of the work we do initially as junior doctors, most of it, well, 10% of it actually, to 20%, sometimes goes unpaid. We've got a problem with regards to a GP shortage in the country. It takes 11 years to train a GP from medical school. So the key to seeing more patients is incentivizing the current GPs to work. My question to Len is very simply, if most GPs are already on £80,000 a year average salary, how is Labour proposing to incentivise GPs to do more shifts and more work? If you're going to be taxing them more, you're going to have a huge exodus of GPs. You start taxing senior doctors and GPs at the rate Labour plans to do so over the next few years.
No, Sanjay, that just isn't true. First of all, £80,000 a year, the increase is a minimal amount of increase. And junior doctors, or indeed GPs who feel that is unfair are not suddenly going to flood away from the NHS or indeed from the country. I just don't think that is right at all, because I don't find GPs or junior doctors as selfish in that way. And you've just hit the point a perfect point. It takes 11 years to train people, and yet we are short of doctors. We've had this Conservative government in power for 10 years, and it is only Labour that will introduce sufficient funds into our National Health Service in order to start training people again, including the bursaries for nurses, which this Tory government took away. It is only Labour who you can trust to make certain that our National Health Service is kept running properly and properly funded.
And Sangeeth, you clearly don't agree with that.
I don't. I think none of my colleagues who are initially Labour supporters are going to be voting Labour. I think if Labour comes into power, you will not see an improvement in NHS. It will be the decline of the NHS and the privatisation of the NHS.
That's just an extraordinary statement, and one that I suspect the vast majority of your profession would disagree with. The BMA would certainly disagree with it. And by the way, my doctor's surgery, which is a fantastic doctor's surgery, they certainly wouldn't agree with you.
Final word, Sangeeth?
I think that Len's done a great job as pitching his position, and I think it's an unshakable position. I respect his position, but having worked in NHS for 14 years, I respectfully disagree that Labour's policies will incentivise more GPs currently to work more shifts to cover the long waiting times. You're in for a huge downfall if you think taxing senior doctors and GPs more will reduce the waiting times in hospitals and in GP surgeries. Impossible.
Well, that's the kind of respectful dialogue we like, even if people disagree. Thank you very much. Martin's in Mayfair. Hello, Martin.
Hi, morning. Once Len McCluskey described the anti-Semitism within the Labour Party as mood music to discredit Corbyn. Does Len McCluskey consider himself part of the problem?
Well, first of all, Martin, the terminology of mood music, I regret saying it, and it's not a statement I have used ever since. It was a while back. What I was trying to explain was that the idea that the Labour Party is somehow anti-Semitic and toxic, I reject out of hand. I've been a member of the Labour Party for 50 years.
Why is it being investigated by the Equalities and Human Rights
There's
Commission?
no problem with it being investigated. And let's
the only other political party to have been investigated was the BNP.
Let's wait to see what the outcome is of the HMRC. The reality is that I believe they will find that the Labour Party is certainly not inherently anti-Semitic. And so, Martin, the point I was trying to make was that the media were attempting to create, aided and abetted, by the way, with a number of our own Labour MPs, were trying to create an image that somehow the Labour Party was anti-Semitic, and it clearly
so just by
isn't.
Covering this, you think the media is aiding and abetting whoever? I mean, surely if you have hundreds, and it was hundreds of incidents, and they're still going on now,
And
we have a right to report that, do we not?
I don't dispute that, but you know full well that there are Tory press,
which we have covered. We have covered Tory Islamophobia as well.
Which the Tory press have gone overboard in trying to create this image. You are right. There was hundreds. Remember, I've just said that there was 480,000 new members flooded into the Labour Party, and of course, a lot of these issues come up in social media, where people make comments. Labour now has a process to deal with. There is dozens of people who've been expelled, and will continue to do that until the last anti-Semite is kicked out of the Labour Party. But for people to try and believe that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic is just simply wrong. It's not the case. And sorry, Martin, let me just finish on this point. The argument centres to a very large extent be around the Palestinian question and criticism of the Israeli government. Let me make this point. I criticise the Israeli government. It's the most right-wing government, one of the most right-wing governments within the world. I criticise that. But I defend the right of Israel to exist. But I also believe in the right of Palestine to exist in a peaceful manner. And that's where the conflicting arguments come about anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much, Martin. Let's go to Sabrina in Islington. Hello, Sabrina.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. My question is, so I've been in London, in Islington, for many years now. I can't vote, although I live in Jeremy Corbyn constituency. My question is, so this country has a huge class issue. And I agree with basically almost everything that is in the program, in the manifesto. How going after people that earn just above £80,000 makes sense? And I can explain a little bit better. In London, a young family where perhaps a father works in IT, 2 children, living in Islington, around where Jeremy lives.
Okay, we need your question, please.
Yeah, how does that make sense? Like, why Labour instead, is not going after the uber rich, the ultra rich people that in this country actually live off the money and the wealth that they inherited, and going to go after young families.
But they are, Sabrina. And look, let's nail this issue. The £80,000 and the increase in tax is very, very minimal indeed. You've talked about class issues, and you're not wrong. And that's why my message to ordinary working people throughout our nation who voted Leave and those that voted Remain, but in particular those voted Leave, come home to Labour. It is only Labour that is tackling the inequality. It's only Labour that will deal with your concerns. Come home to Labour if you want a better society.
We have to call it quits there. We could have gone on for another hour given the number of callers. But Len, thank you very much indeed for joining us over the last hour. That's Len McCluskey, General Secretary of Unite the Union. I have to give the candidates in Jeremy Corbyn's constituency, because it was mentioned there, Islington, is it Islington North or South? I can never remember. North, I think. Conservative James Clark, Brexit Party Joseph David, Green Party Caroline Russell, Liberal Democrats Nick Wakeling. I'll be back tomorrow from 7. We have a youth debate at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. There's a monster raving loony as well that I forgot. Nick the Incredible Flying Brick. What an uplifting way to end the programme. So our youth debate tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Do join us for that. Coming up at 3, it's Iain Payne. But next, with